Princess Xyrella of the Athari Dominion stepped into the cold corridors of the orbital prison station, her long silver cloak trailing behind her as guards walked at her sides. The silence of the place was heavy, broken only by the hum of failing lights and the distant clang of metal doors locking behind them. This prison held the most dangerous enemies of the Athari Empire, mostly rebels, war criminals, and the last of the captured humans from the expansion wars. She was here to inspect the last living human soldier, Elias Vorn, a name she had heard whispered in fear and hatred, even among her most hardened generals. No one knew much about him except that he had led an entire battalion alone after the fall of his fleet, holding off alien forces with nothing but scavenged weapons and unshakable will. He had been captured nearly dead, yet he had survived 4 years in solitary confinement, never speaking, never begging. When she entered his cell, the door hissed open slowly, and there he was, tall, still, and seated against the back wall, his arms bound in magnetic cuffs, his eyes calm and unblinking. As they locked onto hers, a strange chill ran through Xyrella's spine, not of fear, but something older, something she couldn't name. She stared at him, waiting for him to speak, but he said nothing, and still, she couldn't bring herself to look away. His presence was not violent or wild, it was quiet, focused, and completely aware, as though he saw right through the polished armor she wore and the titles she held. She tried to question him about the war, about his people, about the past, but he remained silent, watching her with eyes that seemed to hold entire lifetimes of pain. Then, just before she turned to leave, he spoke in a voice low and steady. "Do you feel it?" he asked. She froze, confused, and asked what he meant. He nodded once, slowly. The bond. Her heart skipped a beat, though she didn't understand why. Her guard stepped forward, ready to stun him, but she raised a hand, stopping them. She demanded to know what he was talking about, but he only said, "They buried it. Your kind forgot. But not me." Uneasy and shaken, Xyrella left the cell, but something had changed inside her, a flicker of something ancient waking in her. Blood. That night, in her private chambers aboard the station, she couldn't sleep. She dreamt of strange stars, of old temples, and of standing beside Elias in a war she had never seen. The next morning, alarms sounded across the station, systems failing, corridors locking, power fluctuating. A message from command warned her a sabotage had been detected. Someone was trying to destroy the station with her still on board. She ran with her guards toward the escape hangar, but midway through the passage, an explosion tore through the floor, separating her from her team. Smoke and fire filled the halls. Lost and alone, she tried to call for help, but comms were dead. Then a hand grabbed her arm, not rough, not painful, steady and strong. It was Elias, freed from his cell, still cuffed but alive. He pulled her behind cover as more charges detonated. She screamed at him, asked how he had escaped, but he didn't answer. "They don't want you to know the truth," he said. "They're here to kill us both." She didn't trust him, couldn't, yet something deep inside her said he was right. He led her through ruined corridors, dodging fallen beams and leaking plasma pipes, until they reached a small hangar bay. An old Athari scout ship rested there, barely fueled, but enough to escape. The hangar door was locked, sealed tight. She turned to him and asked why he was helping her. He looked her in the eyes and said, "Because we're not enemies. Not anymore. Not if the bond is real." The word echoed in her head again. Bond. She didn't understand it, but she felt it in the strange warmth when she stood near him, in the way their movements seemed to mirror, in the dreams she had never dreamed before. He asked her to unlock his cuffs. She hesitated, torn between duty and something more powerful than orders. With trembling fingers, she activated the release code, and the cuffs clicked open. He flexed his arms once, then climbed into the pilot's seat. She followed. As they lifted off, fire swallowed the prison behind them. From the stars above, she received one final message from command: "Do not trust the human. Eliminate him immediately." But Zyrella didn't answer. Her eyes were on Elias now, and deep inside her, something old and forgotten was waking, a truth buried in blood and history. The stars stretched before them, and the future felt uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure: her life had just changed forever. The stolen scout ship flew through the dark stretch of space, its engines barely holding together as Elias steered them far from the burning prison station they had just escaped. Zyrella sat behind him, still shaken, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Her world had been one of order, loyalty, and duty, but now she was sitting beside a human and enemy who had saved her life and whispered about a bond she did not understand. The stars outside blurred into lines as they jumped into hyperspace. But even in motion, there was no peace. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the soft beeping of the damaged control panels. Zyrella wanted answers, and finally, she spoke, demanding the truth. Elias glanced back, his voice quiet but clear as he said he had known about the bond for years, long before she even stepped into his prison cell. He explained that long ago, before the wars, before fear and pride poisoned the galaxy, humans and Ithari had made a secret pact of spiritual and genetic connection between chosen bloodlines, a union stronger than any treaty. It was not love at first sight or magic, but something older, deeper, something meant to bring balance between species. He had felt the pull the moment he saw her, and when she looked into his eyes, a small part of her had awakened too. Zyrella refused to believe it, yet she couldn't ignore the way her skin burned when near him, the way her thoughts seemed to echo his, or the strange memories she never lived. Elias told her the truth had been buried on purpose. The High Council of Ither feared the bond, feared the power it gave to those who carried it. Because once bonded, an Ithari and a human could resist mind control, sense each other across distances, and even survive injuries that would kill others. It was a connection that made rulers uneasy. Those who carried the bond were hunted down, silenced, erased from records. He himself had only survived because he learned to hide what he was. Zyrella listened, her heart racing, not knowing what to believe anymore. Everything she had been taught, the honor of her people, the shame of humans, the noble lies now felt like shadows hiding something greater. Their ship suddenly jerked out of hyperspace, alarms screaming. A tracker had been placed on the hull, and someone was closing in fast. A warship appeared on sensors, bearing the royal crest. It was no rescue mission. They were here to destroy the vessel and make sure the secret never left that prison. Elias moved quickly, guiding the ship into a nearby asteroid field. The warship fired, missing by inches as debris slammed into their side. Zyrella, gripping the edge of her seat, asked if he could lose them. Elias didn't answer, his eyes locked on the floating rocks ahead. He flew the ship like it was part of him, dodging spinning fragments and slipping between narrow paths. The larger vessel couldn't follow, not without tearing apart its hull. Inside the shadows of the asteroids, they found a temporary refuge, a cave in a hollow moon, large enough to hide the ship. As the engines cooled, Zyrella and Elias sat in silence once more, both breathing hard, both trying to understand what was happening. She looked at him, saw the cuts on his face, the blood, the fire in his eyes. He had no reason to lie to her. If he wanted to kill her, he could have. Instead, he saved her twice. She asked him what would happen if the bond was real. He said it already was. Her pulse quickened. She asked how to be sure. Elias hesitated, then reached into the side of his jacket and pulled out a small device. It looked ancient, made of crystal and metal, glowing softly. It was called a truth stone, left behind by a vanished race who once guided the bonded. It only worked on pairs whose connection had awakened. He placed it on the floor between them. It pulsed once, then again, faster and brighter. Zyrella's eyes widened as the light reached toward her, and suddenly, images filled her mind, memories that were not hers. She saw herself in another time, standing in the ruins of a broken city beside Elias, both dressed in strange armor, hands covered in ash, but alive, united. She saw peace talks, the end of wars, the birth of something greater. Then, just as quickly, the light faded, and the stone turned still. She sat in stunned silence, her chest tight, her thoughts spinning. The bond was real. Everything she had known, every command, every lesson had been built on lies, meant to keep her from the truth. Elias looked at her, not demanding, not proud, just waiting. She didn't know what to say, didn't know what came next. But she knew one thing. She couldn't go back. Not to the throne, not to the lies, not without answers. The enemy they had both escaped wasn't just a rogue faction. It was part of something larger, an ancient force that feared the return of the bond, feared what it could do to the order they had built. Xyrella stood, her voice steady for the first time since the escape, and said they needed to find out who was behind the sabotage, who wanted them silenced, and why the bond had been hidden for so long. Elias nodded, already charting a course. Together, they prepared the ship once more. The galaxy was still wide and dangerous, and they were being hunted. But now they were more than fugitives. They were something old, something rare, and their truth had only just begun to unfold. The hollow moon was silent and dark as Elias guided the damaged scout ship deeper into its ancient cave, its walls smooth and oddly shaped, like they had been carved long ago by hands not human nor Ithari. The ship's lights flickered weakly, but they were enough to show markings along the stone, strange symbols that pulsed faintly when Xyrella walked past them. Neither of them said a word at first, but both felt something like the place was not empty, like it remembered them. As they stepped out of the ship and walked further in, the air grew warmer, and a low humming sound filled their ears, not loud, but steady, like a heartbeat buried in the rock. Xyrella touched one of the glowing symbols, and it flashed brighter, sending waves of energy through her hand and into her chest. She gasped, stumbling back, and Elias caught her, steadying her as the humming grew stronger. He looked around, eyes scanning the cave walls, then whispered that this was no ordinary moon. It was one of the lost sanctuaries, places built long ago to guide and protect bonded pairs across the stars. These sanctuaries had been wiped from maps, hidden, their creators erased by empires that feared their knowledge. They followed the symbols deeper until they reached a large circular chamber, filled with a soft blue glow that came from the floor itself. In the center stood a platform surrounded by tall stone pillars, each one carved with scenes of humans and Ithari standing together, not as enemies, but as allies. Some held hands, some fought side by side, and some stood before glowing lights that seemed to reach into their bodies. Xyrella walked forward slowly, drawn by something inside her. Elias stayed close, silent, watching her as she stepped onto the platform. The glow rose around her, and suddenly, the floor responded, lifting her slightly off the ground, light wrapped around her wrists, then her chest, not burning, but warm and steady. Elias stepped forward in alarm, but Xyrella raised a hand, telling him she was fine. The chamber began to hum louder, and then Elias was pulled forward by the same invisible force, drawn onto the platform beside her. The moment they stood together, the light surged, and their minds were flooded with visions, not memories, but knowledge. They saw the origin of the bond, created by ancient beings who believed the galaxy could only survive through unity between different kinds. They saw the rise of fear, how the powerful chose to destroy the bond to keep control. They saw that bonded pairs had power, emotional and physical strength beyond normal limits, the ability to share thoughts, feel pain together, even survive things that should kill them. The light showed them a map systems where other sanctuaries might still exist, places that could help them understand more. Then, just as quickly, the light faded, and they dropped back onto the stone. Their hands touched, and Xyrella felt his heart beat as if it were her own. She looked into Elias's eyes, no longer confused but afraid, not of him, but of what the galaxy would do to stop them. Elias helped her stand, his face pale but calm, and said they needed to leave fast. The sanctuary had awakened their bond, but it had also sent out a signal. Someone would come. They raced back to the ship, the control panels now glowing brighter, as if the sanctuary had repaired more than just their connection. Systems came back online, and new coordinates blinked on the map, one of the locations from the vision. Before they could jump, a warning flashed across the screen. A Ithari cruiser was entering the moon's orbit. It was not a search vessel, it was armed and ready to destroy anything inside. Xyrella sat at the console, heart pounding, knowing that if they were caught, they would be separated, studied, maybe erased. She looked at Elias, and he nodded once. He trusted her, and she trusted him. She gripped the controls and activated the launch. The ship shook as it rose from the cave, the cruiser firing already, lasers slicing through the surface. But the scout ship was faster now, more responsive. As they flew upward, dodging fire, Xyrella used a strange instinct she hadn't known. She had moving through space not just with training, but with something deeper, like she could feel the path through danger. Elias manned the weapons, returning fire, not to kill, but to distract. The cruiser couldn't match their speed. With a final blast from the engines, they jumped into hyperspace, leaving the cruiser behind. Silence returned inside the ship, and for a moment, all they heard was the hum of the engine and their own breathing. Xyrella sat back, her hands trembling, her chest full of energy that didn't feel like fear or adrenaline, but like something else, like the beginning of change. Elias turned to her and said the bond was no longer asleep. It had awakened, and now it was part of them, whether they liked it or not. She asked if it would grow stronger. He said yes, and with it, danger would grow too. There were people out there powerful, hidden, who feared the return of bonded pairs and would do anything to keep the truth buried. But now they had a path, a destination, and each other. The stars stretched before them once more, and this time, they were not just running, they were searching for answers, for others like them, for the reason the bond was made in the first place. And somewhere deep inside, Xyrella no longer feared the truth, she wanted it. The scout ship moved through deep space, silent and fast, heading toward the next sanctuary hidden in the ruins of a forgotten system. But peace was short-lived as a new signal appeared on the screen. A royal fleet, massive and heavily armed, was waiting ahead, blocking the path like a wall of steel stars, and Xyrella knew at once this was not a coincidence, but a trap carefully set by her own people to force her return or erase her entirely. She stared at the blinking dots on the map, each one a warship loyal to the throne she had once served, and her heart twisted with confusion and fear, because among them was the flagship of her brother, Commander Riven, the one who had raised her after their parents' death and sworn to protect the Empire's secrets, even if it meant destroying his own blood. Elias stood beside her, calm but alert, and when he asked what she planned to do, Xyrella had no answer, because every choice seemed to lead to lost surrender and let Elias be taken, or fight and become a traitor to everything she was raised to believe. The bond inside her pulsed stronger now, a warm pressure that spread through her chest and into her thoughts, linking her with Elias so clearly that when she looked at him, she could almost hear what he was about to say. He told her gently that he would go if she asked, that he would surrender and let them take him, just to keep her safe. But his voice, though calm, held pain behind it, the kind that comes from being abandoned too many times. She looked away, torn between duty and something she didn't yet have the courage to name. The fleet hailed them, and Riven's voice came through sharp, commanding, but with an edge of concern. He demanded she board his ship at once, alone, and promised no harm would come to her, but he made it clear the human was not welcome. Elias said she didn't have to go, but Xyrella knew she had to face her brother, if not for answers, then to see if any part of him still cared for truth. She left the ship with a heavy heart, stepping into a shuttle that carried her to the flagship where guards in gold armor waited silently, their weapons not aimed at her, but ready. Riven stood in the command hall, tall and proud, his expression unreadable as he looked at her. He told her she had been misled, that the bond was a lie humans spread to break the will of authority leaders, that Elias had fooled her using human tricks. She stood tall and told him the bond was real, that she had felt it, seen it, and that it was older than any war. His face darkened, and he ordered her to hand over Elias and return to Ither for cleansing. When she refused, Riven softened his tone and tried to remind her of their childhood, of the times he carried her through the snow gardens when she cried. She felt a flicker of emotion, but it was crushed by the cold truth he no longer saw her as his sister, only as a threat to the order he served. He gave her one last chance, and when she said no, his voice grew sharp again. He declared her bond illegal, her actions dangerous, and sent her back to the scout ship under guard. But what he didn't know was that Xyrella had already sent out a broadcast to every ship in the area showing the Sanctuary vision, the Truth Stone activation, and the records of ancient peace hidden in the Moon Cave. Data that couldn't be faked. The transmission spread like wildfire through the fleet. And though many officers stayed loyal, others began to hesitate, whispering about what it meant. Some pilots refused to fire. Confusion and doubt spread like cracks in glass. Back aboard the scout ship, Elias looked at her and said quietly, "You made your choice," and she nodded, not as a princess or soldier, but as someone who had finally stopped running from herself. Riven, realizing control was slipping, ordered the fleet to disable the scout ship by force. Laser fire lit the stars, but many of the shots missed or came late, as pilots delayed just long enough. Elias and Xyrella moved fast, dodging blasts, firing warning shots, never to kill, only to escape. A smaller frigate, crewed by young officers who had seen the truth, opened a safe path and gave cover. The scout ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind a broken fleet, a shaken brother, and a galaxy no longer sure of its own history. Inside the quiet hum of the ship, Xyrella sat beside Elias and finally spoke the words she had feared. "I believe in the bond. I believe in us." He looked at her not with triumph, but with something deep relief, hope, maybe even love. And though the war was far from over, and enemies still waited in shadows, the choice had been made. She was no longer a puppet of a throne, and he was no longer a prisoner of war. Together, they were something new, something powerful. And the stars ahead had never seemed so full of light. The stars outside the scout ship shimmered like quiet watchers as Elias and Xyrella followed the last set of coordinates revealed by the ancient sanctuary, a path that led them to a long-forgotten system hidden behind a curtain of solar storms and broken space, a place untouched by war or trade, marked only in myths whispered by travelers who believed in lost technology and forbidden truths. As they entered the system, their sensors picked up strange signals, faint, rhythmic, and not from any known language. It was an old beacon, repeating a call that hadn't been heard for thousands of years. They followed the sound to a shattered planet, its surface cracked and glowing from beneath, as if something still burned in its heart. Orbiting it was a structure unlike anything Xyrella had seen, a massive ring of silver and crystal, wide enough to circle a moon, humming with silent power. This was the final sanctuary, left behind by the first keepers, the ancient beings who had created the bond between species and believed in unity over control. As they approached, the ring came to life, scanning them, not just their bodies, but their connection, reading the energy between their minds and hearts. The ship was pulled in gently, not with force, but with purpose. Inside, the sanctuary was still alive, its halls lit by soft white light, its walls covered in glowing symbols and forgotten language that somehow made sense to Xyrella as she walked beside Elias. The bond had grown stronger. She could feel his thoughts without words, his feelings without touch, and she knew he felt hers too. In the heart of the sanctuary, they found a chamber that showed the truth, holograms of history long erased, records of how the bond had once united planets and brought peace, and how fear, envy, and hunger for power had driven leaders to destroy. But the records also showed something more, a prediction that one day, when war burned the stars again, two bonded souls would awaken the sanctuaries and bring light back to the galaxy. Xyrella and Elias watched in silence, realizing they were not chosen by chance, but by design, part of something far greater than themselves. Before they could speak, alarms blared across the sanctuary. A massive ship had entered the system, larger than anything either of them had seen, its dark hull marked with the sigil of the Threx Dominion, a hidden faction that had worked behind every throne, every council, every war, pulling strings to keep species divided, fearing the bond and the peace it could bring. The Threx had come to destroy the last sanctuary, erase the bond forever, and end any chance of unity. Elias and Xyrella rushed back to their ship, but the sanctuary itself spoke through a glowing panel, offering them one gift before it went silent: a key, not a weapon, but a pulse of energy that would awaken other bonds buried in sleeping bloodlines. Across the galaxy, the moment they accepted it, light filled the room, wrapping around them, strengthening their connection beyond anything they had felt. The pulse spread through space, a wave of light and sound that traveled faster than any ship, touching thousands of lives, humans and Ithari who had always felt different, who had dreams they didn't understand, now feeling the truth in their hearts. But there was no time to wait. The Threx flagship opened fire, sending waves of energy blasts toward the sanctuary. Elias took the pilot seat, Xyrella beside him, working together as if one mind. They dodged through the storm, their ship faster now, smarter, linked to them, as if alive. They couldn't destroy the Threx ship, not with the weapons they had, but they could lead it into the sanctuary's final defense, an energy core hidden inside the ring. With every move, they shared thought and instinct, guiding the ship through narrow gaps, weaving past destruction. The Threx followed, unaware of the trap until it was too late. Xyrella activated the core, and the sanctuary's power surged, not in violence, but in light, wrapping the Threx ship and swallowing it whole. When the light faded, the enemy was gone, and the sanctuary began to collapse, its purpose complete. Elias and Xyrella flew out just in time, watching the great ring fall into the planet's glowing sky. The galaxy was not saved yet, but something had changed. The bond had returned, not just in them, but in others. Across our systems, people began to feel it: pilots who sensed their co-pilots' thoughts, leaders who could feel the pain of strangers, soldiers who dropped their weapons when they realized their enemy was also their bondmate. Peace didn't come overnight, but the spark had been lit. As the scout ship drifted quietly through space, Xyrella looked at Elias, her eyes soft but strong, and said they would never be alone again. He smiled, not with pride, but with quiet trust. They had fought, run, and survived, but more than that, they had changed the stars, not with war, but with a bond no one could break. And out in the dark, where fear had once ruled, something new was growing: hope.